Welcome back to another, well, whatever we call it. We don't know yet, right, Andrea?
Yeah, yeah,
Stories on facilitating software architecture and design. And we have a new subtitle.
yeah. And that subtitle is The Realities of Systems Change.
Yeah. And unfortunately, Andrew isn't here for the second episode. He's still on holiday, hopefully enjoying himself. But he will be here next time, he promised us. So last time we did a small introductions on why are we actually doing this podcast or video recording, blog post series, whatever. Um, and we talked at the end, like today we're gonna dive into transparency, right? So the stories are all about how to get towards ivory tower or hands-on architect being blocking to how can I actually let teams start to do architecture and not be blocking, right? And one part you last time mentioned is transparency. So let's dive into that. What do you mean with that?
Yeah. And also, I wanted to add to it's not just ivory tower architecture that can be what blocking on the flow. It's also, even if you have more hands on architecture, both of them can be blocking in some way
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, you're kind of relying on a small group of people being the ones that make the decision officially, right? Even if sometimes they don't have sufficient context or whatever, and sometimes they do, but generally this is where the blocking happens. So we talked about the side effects of that. Let's not revisit,
Yeah.
should we?
No, and I think a good book to dive into more is Turn the Ship Around, right? We want to make the decision to where the knowledge and information is. So yeah, instead of being the hands-on architect that has the information or the ivory tower that has the information, you think you have the information, but actually the people actually writing the software usually have the information. You want to turn it around and facilitate them making the decision. So that's what's
Yeah,
about. Turn the Ship
teach
Around is a good.
them, teach.
Yeah, we're going to add it. But yeah, transparency is a very important factor if you want to
Yeah,
start becoming that facilitating architecture.
absolutely. So transparency is a great place to start, no matter what your organization, like which part of the journey your organization is at. It's a good way to start improving things because decision making is a process, right? So if you're in a team, imagine you're in a team and you're like, we need to make some difficult decision. Or imagine that you're as a principal or an architect at hands-on and you need to make a decision. Or if you're an ivory tower architect, still you have this, oh, okay, we have some sort of problem or some request. You need to make a decision. And now you need to possibly find some options. You need to first agree more or less on the problem, which it could be that. And that's not always straightforward. Sometimes it's straightforward, but sometimes it's not. But then you have the option making, and then you have, hopefully you get choosing one of the options and you make the decision. However, all that process can, depending on the decision, take quite a while. And the suggestion here or the story comes to trying to bring transparency to that process. And that means that whoever you are in all of this, you can, if this is not happening in your org, you can literally start writing it down. And the whole point of that is to just add it's like having a memory of what happened, or at least
Yeah.
the way you saw it.
I
So
think everyone has that experience, right? Going into a project as a software engineer, and you're like, why did they make this decision? I think everyone has that, and you
yep,
actually want to know what happened. So you become sort of like this historian looking at why did they make this decision, and I think that helps, right? That transparency to just look at, okay, why did they actually make it? What
yep,
happened? What happened in the conversation that they switched from A to B, maybe, or I don't know.
yep.
Why haven't they thought of option like this? Oh, they thought of it. It's written down now. So everyone has that problem, but nobody seems to, not nobody, but it seems to be very hard to actually start doing that.
Sometimes you're lucky and you have someone that was there. And
Yeah.
the problem is that if you do get a story, that story might just not be complete enough. One easier way to start doing this transparency thing for your future self is to write decision records. And so I heard about decision records many, many years ago. And the first time I experienced them, it wasn't a great experience. And that's because we were told that we had to do it. Right. So sometime at some point it's like, some reason I can't remember what was the reason. You need to start doing this decision record thing. But that was it. It
As a,
wasn't
as a or as a bureaucratic process, you need to do this, else you cannot continue.
to be honest, I can't remember if that was the ethos of or the origin
Yeah.
of this request, and it might have been well intentioned. But I think writing decision records is actually kind of not. It sounds easy, and when you read the history of how it came about with the Nygaard, what's his first name? I forgot his first name, but
Michael Knight, yeah.
Michael Nygaard. And so he said, "Hey, really simple, just write it down, and that'd be all good." But the reality is that now that's he presented, or at least the model I had for decision records is that you write them at the end. You decided on some database choice, let's say, for example. At the end, when you finish, which actually probably took quite a while of time, you're like, we chose Postgres, reason one, reason two, and you bang it in your repo. But I don't find that to be the most useful way. What I find more useful is to write a decision record as a process that you start from quite early in the decision making process, and then you start adding all the options. And it doesn't need to be a long document. It just needs
Like
to
a
have
lot.
the information.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think I do wrote ADRs, but they weren't enforced on me, and it quite worked. Uh, the problem I had with it is that it's after the fact. It's like writing your unit test after your code worked, right? And for me, what you're saying as well, it's transparency. So if we dive into the transparency part, what I see usually happening in a lot of companies now is that nobody knows who can make the decision and nobody knows what has been said. And I talk to person A and they say blah blah blah, and then I go to C and they say, yeah, but that person said that and that person said that. So just writing the ADR itself for yourself and just say, well, I've written down what that person said, and that's this and this and this. You make it transparent what people said. Of course, I check up with the people, right? Hey, I written it down. Is this correct? Sure. Can I share it? Sure. And then, right, you want to have that consent that it's shareable. But then the next time in a meeting, well, actually, the person said this, and
It,
then, oh, what? But we had a whole different conversation. I see it differently, which can happen. Sure. Okay, then we sit down together, right? So,
yes, absolutely.
uh, yeah. So I think that's the bit one about the transparency. Just doing that already changes what you were saying a lot. Just start writing them once you start making the decision. And
So
as
one
a,
thing that I find really useful is to, if you're doing it as some sort of group, because imagine that there is some group of people, and no matter what your role is in there, and you decide to start writing this, but nobody else does. Not very useful. Or some better than nothing, but still, could be better. What I find more useful is if you decide as a team. And again, start at a team level, not like suddenly everyone writes ADRs without any help or coaching or anything, more likely to fail. But if you just start with one team and go, right, let's write these ADRs and let's have a decision record review every week where we go through the decision records that were written this week. And the first DR can be, should we use DRs and the options for it and everything. Which is nice because what you want to do is gonna start doing the practice, right? So we're talking here about the how you need to facilitate the practice of architecture. And I think this is a prime example of something that's simple, but if you really foster it and enable it about like what is a good DR? The fact that you should include pros and cons, the fact that you should it's very useful to include the opinions of different people. And this is really good advice. Like if you want an excellent summary on what is a good decision record process, that is in Andrew's book, which I hope we can discuss next time as well when they are here.
because I like the way he adds the advice to it, right? But
Yes.
you come up to a good point whenever I talk to people like this. They're saying, "Oh, how do I start? How do I start?" Well, start small. So you were saying alone is it's okay, but I still think two people doing it. You need at least two. That also something that I was research in cognitive sciences, right? If there's a norm and you're off the norm, you think different. All you need is another person that has the same thinking, and if you both do it, then there might be change. So you
Yeah.
need two, and that's what I actually started doing. I did it with someone else, and we just start doing it out in the open. We also had a facilitating architecture role, right? So I was not in the team. What happened was very interesting is that they saw it started to work because we kept referencing and we kept doing the discipline. And all of a sudden, other people started doing it because they say, well, I've had it. That seemed to work. I'm going to write one now. And that was really helpful. And all of a sudden, it was all out in the open and people were talking about, have you seen what they wrote down? Especially the advice, right? People writing the advice started tagging people in it. Like, you need to write down your advice here. Just talked on the hallway, but it needs to be in this document because I've had it with all these chitty chat and this gossiping or all this back and forth. Just put it in that document and it's just a shared mental model. And just us two starting it together out in the open for tough decisions and making the decision actually work and people being happy, that set it off, right? So if you're in either what you're saying, right? If you're in a team and you're just two people starting it, or you're an architect between the teams and you start it off, try to do it out in the open, experiment with it safely. I think that goes with a lot of architectural tools, right? It seems usually so big, but you can actually make it small and start experimenting.
I think one thing, totally all of that, and the thing that really helped in this case that I'm thinking about is not just doing it in the open and kind of coaching through like in stand up, be like, oh, we need to, oh, I'm need to do X or Y. It's like, oh, that sounds like you need a decision record. And people
Yeah.
initially were like, okay, fine. But then they started saying, oh, it looks like you need a decision record. And that's when they started really seeing the value because I
Yeah.
think one of the main things that it does is when you're having the review meetings are super focused because if people that are there haven't read the decision record, you start it off and you go like, has everyone here read this? If people go like, yeah, it's like, okay, let's just spend 5 minutes and read it quietly. So you read it quietly and yeah, it would have been nicer if it was read before, you know, we are where we are. So read the thing and then actually have a discussion about it. The minute this conversation or someone is like, oh, but what about this other decision? You can easily say, and this has happened as well. It's like, great question. Sounds like you need a new decision record or whatever. It's just not part of this. And
Yeah.
also during the decision record, that everyone can collaboratively edit this decision.
Yeah.
So someone is saying something about this, it's like, oh, Kenny said X, Y, Z. And it can be there and then. And so it becomes this really rich thing. And the best thing about it all is that you have less of the same meeting. So generally when decisions are difficult, you wind up having the same meeting like a bunch of times, or people kind of think it's not, no, that didn't happen, but it does. And some of that comes to how we make decisions. It could be that this team is used to the comfort of consensus. Some other teams are the comfort of delegating the decision, and somewhere in between, and even kind of surfacing as like, who should make this decision? But now it becomes an explicit issue. It's like, for this decision, maybe we're okay deciding, but this other one, we're not sure. And then actually you're like, oh, we don't know who should make, like, and then you start thinking, what are the side effects? What's the worst that can happen? And you start maybe going on, like it's an explicit question. So it's also a decision. So it's transparency all
Oh.
around.
Yeah, and I think for the next part, because I think this is very relevant. So one thing out of today's thing to get with, start writing, at least with, find someone you can start doing writing ADRs with, use them for the whole process, not at the end. And I think that's a huge shift, right? Start it once you have the problem, name it after the problem, and then start adding it while you're trying to make the decision. And in the end, you can do sort of like, and that's what you were saying, like a review session. Now, we should talk about this in the next session, right? So about who makes the decision, what's this review session, because that can also sound like a sort of blocking gatekeeping thing, but it shouldn't, right? It should be an advice thing and not like we should discuss this first. It should be about learning that moment in time. There's many ways of doing that. Let's keep that to another session as well. And one other thing I was thinking about what I said earlier, you were saying, well, don't just write them once you make the decision, you write them for the whole thing. In the next session, I want to invite Diana Montelian, our friend, right? Writing is thinking. She talks a lot about that. And I think it's the same with writing unit tests and then make the code. I think it's the same for me. And I want to explore that with Diana next time in one of the next session, right? For me, it's the same. Like if you use the ADR as a writing as thinking tool, instead of we're just capturing the decision, that is a whole change. So maybe we can pick up another session.
That sounds like a great idea. I think for different people, it's going to be different. Like, for example, I find modeling really good for thinking. I find that sometimes I will write this at the start and other times I don't. And it depends when I do that, for example. So I think it's good to, I think we're quite aligned, but not the same. And I think this is what makes this conversation better.
Yeah.
And also, I think that when we're talking about these experiences about the experience I just talked about and the one that you talked about, what I'd love to do with this series of videos is that to help people that are anywhere in there, like they're somewhere in this journey, and that maybe they can take something that is useful now and something that wouldn't be nice if it was in some new way in the future. So it's like you're somewhere, hopefully you take something away and you can practice it. And then you come back and tell us, how did it go? You tried something. I'd love to hear about that.
Yes. Thanks. So I hope people enjoyed this second episode. Next time we'll have Andrew hopefully here. And please join us at the virtual EDD, but you can also join us in Discord. We'd love to hear your comments and feedback. And see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.